What's up, and welcome back to Nowstalgia Ranks, bringing you another episode where we break down a musician, director, uh, other piece of pop culture that we want to rank in some way. And today we're going to be talking Wes Anderson. I'm joined by my co-host, as always, Dave Martin Swagger. Dave, how you doing, man?
Doing good. I'm very much symmetrical right now, always in frame. How about you?
Yeah, I'm doing well. If I don't know if I introduced myself, my name is Patrick Sheehan. We're hoping that if you're listening to this, you're probably a fan of movies in some way. And if you want to hear our movie reviews, breakdowns of movie news, hit that subscribe. If you're on youtube.com/nostalgiapod, or go to soundcloud.com/nostalgiapod and find all the ways to be receiving our takes. Dave, when we first were kind of thinking, what do we want to do next for nostalgia rankings? Wes Anderson wasn't necessarily the first thing that came to mind. We've been doing a lot of musicians, and I think musicians lend themselves to rankings because, frankly, it's a lot easier to catch up on discographies of the musicians because we can listen to that passively, whereas movies are a lot more engaging. But I gotta say, in preparation for this, watching all these Wes Anderson movies to fill in some of the gaps for myself, I just found myself wanting to move to Brooklyn, man. Is that how you felt after watching these?
Oh no, no, I didn't feel that. Um,
No?
there's a sense of longing, I guess, for the uh, decades-spanning portrayal of New York City in the Royal Tenenbaums, but
Hmm.
uh, I don't know what I feel. His movies are very specific, obviously, but I don't know if I ever have any like overwhelming, like grand takeaway when I watch them, even if he clearly has common themes. It's funny to hear you say that.
Yeah, I think, when I think about how he is kind of portrayed, I think there's a very like Brooklyn vibe to him, which basically is synonymous with hipster when you talk about people who live in Brooklyn from New York City. Um, However, I it's funny because I think more so Wes Anderson has instructed the evolution of the hipster in Brooklyn more so than he is actually a hipster from Brooklyn. I mean, obviously, born in Texas, now currently lives in Paris. I believe he's lived in Europe for quite some time now. Probably has homes in several places, probably somewhere in the United States as well. But um, I think that very specific feel that you mentioned just comes across as uh, alternative in some way. And I think his movies, I mean, we could have picked many other directors who have a lot more commercial success, who have people have seen a lot more of their movies, but his movies are for people who like movies. I think that's kind of the thing that comes to mind with him is he's really an auteur in that way where what he makes is very Wes Anderson. And so I'm excited to kind of break down what that means. Maybe we should start with what is just your relationship with him as a filmmaker? Are you a fan? When did you come out? When did you come on to him?
Yeah, obviously a fan. I don't think I'd be doing this if I wasn't a fan, but definitely came to his movies late. I mean, Bottle Rocket's 96. It's a long time before my adult art critical brain emerged. So a lot of catch up on his movies. I believe the probably started being aware of them as they were coming out, and like Fantastic Mr. Fox came out, I'd say, but I didn't end up seeing one in the theaters till Grand Budapest Hotel with an Isle of Dogs. So it's been a lot of catch up and like looking back, whereas he very much was a man of his time. Like when he was making every time his movies were coming out, they were, being widely discussed online in print. Right. So it's one of those things where even though he doesn't like he's only in his early 50s, he's only been making movies for, you know, 25 years almost. It's not that long, but still coming at it, removed in a certain sense.
Yeah, similar experience for me. I think there was a point sometime after I graduated from college that I became more aware of his work. I'm not exactly sure what that point was. Probably sometime between Moonrise and Grand Budapest, especially with the acclaim that Grand Budapest received. That was probably the tipping point in terms of my intrigue with him and wanting to catch up on his films. But coming into us deciding to rank these, I still had not seen some of the earlier stuff. Catching up on Bottle Rocket, on the Life Aquatic with Steve Zissou. Um, you know, there was certainly a gap, and I think after watching, I'm really struck with the uh, consistency in terms of certain themes across the movies. Right, you already alluded to one, which is I think just the general style of the movies and the framing of his shots. You want to talk a little bit more about what you were referring to earlier?
I mean, just obviously, it's really intentional. It's always symmetrical. There's a famous Kogonada video essay where it's just like hundreds of Wes Anderson frames and stills from his movies, and everything's in focus. It's very specific, and Robert Yeoman has been his director of photography for all of his live action films. You can tell that it's a big part of what he wants to communicate with his stuff. And as he's gotten older and he's made more movies, the colors begin to pop more, and the production design, the settings come across as unique and lavish, even if they're not made on large budgets for movie standards. But yeah, I mean, it's all in one hand, it's almost an obvious thing when you watch his movies. They have a visual style that's unique, and it makes sense because Wes Anderson is one of the few director auteurs. He's a product of a different time, much like Tarantino, in the sense that Wes Anderson does not make take contract work. He makes the movies he wants to make. And only one of his movies is even an adaptation. It's all original stuff from him. So he's unique, no question.
Yeah, definitely unique. And you think about those like symmetrical shots, and so many times I can think about in his movies when you have like the main character or a main character at like the very center of the screen, and then other supporting characters flanking him, but in a very symmetrical way. It's never like two on one side and four on the other. It's always three and three, four and four, five and five, and definitely I think a style that is eye catching and eye popping. And I think also in thinking about a lot of those shots, it kind of reminds me of another aspect of his filmmaking that really stands out to me is his use of miniatures and like stop motion. Which I mean, obviously, two of his films being animated, Isle of Dogs and Fantastic Mr. Fox, quite a bit of stop motion animation in those, obviously, but even in a movie like A Life Aquatic with Steve Zissou, there are parts where they show the boat and they show it like a dollhouse almost, and like what's going on and all the different parts there. Um, I think another movie that reminds me of that is Grand Budapest. There are points when they kind of zoom out and show the landscape and the hotel, and it's a miniature, and I think that kind of stands out and also kind of gives the feel to the stories. They're timeless in the sense that there's not a lot of aspects of them that refer back to a certain time, other than maybe like a general like this is happening in the 1930s, but like a story like Bottle Rocket, a story like um, uh, I don't know, Tenenbaums probably could have taken place anywhere from the 1980s to early 2000s, pre heavy cell phone era. And I think that really stands out, that it gives it like a general kind of sense of time, but they also seem like, other than maybe the technological aspects, that these stories are all kind of timeless, and especially what they're getting at thematically. Did you get that sense watching the movies as well?
Yeah, yeah, I think so. There's a whimsy, there's a certain worldview about the characters that seems to shine through, even if the scale definitely shifts. Right, Grand Budapest much more wide ranging across the lands, as you said, and Darjeeling Limited, literally a journey, never-ending journey, unfortunately. Um, and like no matter the scale of it, there always seems to be that kind of through line if you want to make those connections. But I think everything still stands on its own.
for sure. Any other like stylistic choices that really pop? I guess maybe like the clothing and
Mm.
like the settings, the sets are just really always unique, especially in the more recent films. I think something like Bottle Rocket and Rushmore feel a bit more kind of normal, and not so much like stand out like that. But just the like the clothing, costumes, things like that always stand out. Anything
Yeah.
else for you?
Yeah, that makes sense. Grand Budapest, which was the biggest hit of all his movies, 172 million worldwide, 9 Academy Award nominations, including 4 wins. And those wins would be for costume design, makeup and hairstyling, score for the plot, and production design,
Hmm.
which all make sense, as you were saying.
And I think it's hard to watch what any more than probably one Wes Anderson movie and not see actors pop up from other Wes Anderson movies. He likes to work with the people he likes, right?
Oh, I mean, there's what, 15 people he's worked with in 3 movies? One, two, three, four, five.
And Bill
Yeah,
Murray in all of them.
Bill Murray and everything after Bottle Rocket is the leader. Yep, but also Schwartzman and Owen Wilson, who work with him behind the scenes as well.
Mhm.
It's that also has to be one of his trademarks. It's just that he keeps working with same people, even people that he brings in. More recently, like Saoirse Ronan pops up for the first time in Grand Budapest Hotel, is also in The French Dispatch.
Yep.
Scarlett Johansson, a voice in Isle of Dogs, is now going to be acting live action in his untitled film he's making right now. So he just keeps adding to this ensemble while kind of keeping all his OGs in rotation. It's really cool.
Yeah, it is. It is cool to see and to see them all, play different characters throughout. Kind of get different turns as supporting lead, somewhere in between. I really appreciate that, and I think it probably says a lot about him as a creator that so many people and so many high profile people kind of drop
Mhm.
whatever they're doing or find a way to fit in his projects when they
Yeah.
can.
Yeah, I just counted up. It's 18 actors have been in at least 3 of his movies. And I mean, think about Royal Tenenbaums, which has this wild cast, but they kind of managed to finesse the production so that they could fit in a Ben Stiller, fit in a Gwyneth Paltrow, who were very busy at the time. Everyone there
Mhm.
making scale pay, not getting a big check that they could command normally because they wanted to be a part of that movie. And that's only Wes's third film.
Yeah, pretty remarkable for sure. And I think the last thing that stylistically stands out to me about his movies is the soundtrack. He has a pretty distinct year. I think Grand Budapest as the outlier in this discussion, um, for 60s and 70s rock music, or I guess like maybe pop. It might be a better like general catch-all, but he also seems to kind of try to stick to one artist as like the main running artist for that movie, like the Kinks were, I think, the one in Rushmore. um he a lot of Bowie and Life Aquatic. um Sorry, no, I think Rushmore actually it was Cat Stevens, but the Kinks were Darjeeling, that's what it was.
Right.
And the
The
Beach
Beatles'
Boys
Hey
for
Jude.
Fantastic Mr. Fox. Yep.
In Royalty, of course. Yeah, a lot of famous moments, and they're always like it's not just music on the side; it's like expensive drops, whether it's a master recording
Mhm.
or a cover. A big part of the movie's budget, you'd have to imagine, and like in some cases, like in Royal Tenenbaums, they're carrying like big scenes with that
Yeah.
music.
Yeah, what is it in Tenenbaums has I think it's one or two Elliott Smith songs, which
Yes.
I mean that's a big swing for music, and to really bring a specific vibe. And I also imagine probably was fairly expensive to get
Mhm.
those rights. So yeah, I think that really describes it. Anything else in terms of Wes Anderson movies when you think about them that we missed?
I guess not. It's always fun to reflect on just when he came up. Making movies. Balrog's 96, so he's late 90s, but you just consider everyone who came up in the 90s, whether it's the early 90s or late 90s. It's just really the who's who of the directors people like to talk about these days with Tarantino and Paul Thomas Anderson, Wes Anderson, David Fincher, Alexander Payne, Steven Soderbergh. It's a crazy class and set of peers that he has, and all of them are still very active.
Yeah. Um, and I think it's interesting because I think all those people have distinctions about him. But when I think about people trying to like rip off Wes Anderson, it feels like no one really can do that just because he is so distinct. Like people can rip off PTA, people can rip off Tarantino in some sense, or at least like heavily steal, like take aspects of their stuff.
Mhm.
But Wes Anderson is just so specific that to like take something of his almost is just like pure copying. So truly one of a kind. And of course, we're doing this in anticipation of the French Dispatch, which will be dropping this October after a year of delays, and then an untitled project that is also currently in production. So he's working. He's got some stuff coming out, and these lists that we're going to be giving to you at the end of this maybe evolving, hopefully evolving,
Mm.
with the French Dispatch coming out because I have high hopes for that. But Dave, why don't we start with just kind of working through his filmographies, his 9 films. 1996, Bottle Rocket. I think we both watched this for the first time recently. What are
Mhm.
your takeaways from it?
Yeah, yeah, I didn't really know much of what to expect. Film debut of both Wes Anderson as well as Owen Wilson and Luke Wilson on the acting side. Owen Wilson co-wrote this as long with Rushmore and Royal Tenenbaums. Growing up with Wes, the Wilson brothers did, and it's definitely not as like visually popping as some of his other stuff. The colors aren't quite as specific, but like I think like stuff with like the costume design when they're wearing like the yellow stuff and at the
Mm,
end, like there's still a lot of intentionality there. Uh, I liked the movie. I wouldn't say I loved it, but I think the reason I didn't love it is like the point of the film. It's like these guys are intentionally like portrayed as buffoons and like such
mhm,
small timers. That's
mm,
kind of like the whole point, right? I didn't love how the romance started with Luke just because he's really just kind of creeping around in the hotel. I
yeah,
don't think that part has aged the best. Um, but overall, it's pleasant. I think the best part about it would be Owen Wilson as Diggum, I believe is the
yeah.
name. Yeah, just because like the energy of young Owen, um, the ability to talk really, really fast and deliver on these lines that he, co-wrote for himself, is probably the best part. I think the part that like has lasted for me.
Yeah, I think like the overall like story, um whatever it was trying to get at, whatever like the goal of the story was, is really what stands out to me because I think that's a very specific type of situation where you have this friend who really is kind of a loser in Diggum, and he's kind of pulling Owen Wilson and or sorry Luke Wilson and I'm forgetting who the other actor is who plays Bill along with him to do these stupid
Robert
heists.
Musgrave as Bob.
Right, yeah. Yeah, as Bob, sorry. And they they really obviously don't want to do it. Even in the final heist, they're saying like, "I don't want to do this heist." I'm coming up, and then he
I
leaves
don't
the
want to
door
be
and
here either.
yeah. um, you know, the, that feeling of like, I don't want to be doing this stupid thing with this stupid friend anymore, but feeling that loyalty to them and being pulled in different directions of your life, but wanting to like still be that good friend. It's a very like late 20s, early 30s type of situation. And I think that really aged well. I agree the relationship stuff doesn't work. And even in watching their relationship, it's just kind of like, I think of the part of the movie that I find least interesting. This actually feels like a movie that if he were to like do a remake, could probably do a lot better job with now. But I think this being his first film, it's pretty clear he's like still trying to like figure out his style, figure out what he wants to get across. But yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head. This is really an Owen Wilson showcase, and uh, I think something that had a lot of potential, but just never fully realized.
All right, yes, they're landscapers, but they're also thieves or whatever he said.
Yeah, Oh man.
James Caan's in the movie. He's billed as a part of the movie. Definitely was
Yeah.
the most famous actor in it at the time, but he's really barely in it. I'd love to have more of that presence. But yeah, I mean, it's really focused on those three guys.
Yeah, for sure. Um, so after Bottle Rocket, just a short 2 years later, Rushmore comes out, and Rushmore, I think, is a clear level up for Anderson. You kind of see that he's really starting to find his groove. I still don't. I think when we get to this later, I still don't think it's in his top tier of movies, obviously, but
Me
it
neither.
has a real cult following, and I really appreciate that aspect of it. I enjoyed Rushmore a lot, and mostly because I'm not a huge Jason Schwartzman fan. I mean, anyone that listened to our review of the most recent season of Fargo, he never really works for me. But in this, I just thought he was absolutely magnetic, and to get me to want to follow, um, this character Max Fisher at all is an accomplishment because he's pretty like not fun at all. He's pretty horrible person, and I think that's what stood out to me. What about for you?
Yeah, that's the thing that holds Rushmore back for me as well, which, as you said, is quite popular and is many people's top tier of West
Mhm,
films, but not for me either. And I think that's just because Max Fisher sucks. Like, I can't stand the dude. And that's nothing to do with, like, bad people watching a bad person in a film or TV or anything. It's not that. It's just that I don't like being with the dude, you know?
mhm,
It's like I never feel bad for him, and I just get annoyed with his antics and like his lack of responsibility for his own mistakes and stuff. So
mhm.
I found so much of the movie really grating, you know.
Yeah.
And I like, this is Schwartzman's film debut. It's a good performance. Obviously, it catapults his career and his relationship with Wes. But I think a lot of people actually really like to look back on Bill Murray's uh,
Yeah.
character in this, the first Bill Murray Wes collaboration. They've collaborated on every movie since that Wes has
Mhm,
made, of course. I think I like that stuff. And there's moments I like in Rushmore, like when they're briefly like having a escalating prank war in a certain sense, and
yep.
the stuff at the schools is fun and all. But yeah, I just never really got invested in Max. And also, kind of like Bottle Rocket, he's really creepy to his teacher.
Mhm,
And in this case, he's a young, precocious, naive teenager. So it's not quite, doesn't quite come across as quite as bad as like Luke Wilson and Bottle Rocket, but still not like something I like. So yeah,
mhm.
Rushmore, I wanted to like it more. I really did.
Yeah, it's. I think it's not a bad Wes Anderson movie by any means. I think I agree. Bill Murray obviously is a standout in this, and this kind of rejuvenates his career. Kind of sends him into that supporting actor type role, and obviously leads to him getting some lead actor roles down the line. Uh, I think I also kind of remember when I think about the movie, remember like Brian Cox as being a
Mhm.
someone that was a welcome presence, just kind of being this like really funny, I don't know, like very like calm.
Sure.
Yeah, but like yeah, that, and then he has those moments where he's like, "What the hell?" kind of character. Luke Wilson coming in to get just shit on a couple of times by Max. There are definitely moments, and I can see why this could become a cult classic. The plays, the really elaborate like high school plays, was a funny running bit. There's a lot here that you're like, okay, he's starting to figure it out, and definitely a step up for me from Bottle Rocket. But then obviously he truly levels up and has his first major accomplishment probably in filmmaking with Royal Tenenbaums. And I say major accomplishment because not only does this is a movie that I think is a much better and fully realized movie than any of the previous two, but also finds that commercial success with Tenenbaum that he hadn't found to this point, and also gets his first Oscar nomination for original screenplay with this. Tenenbaum. I mean, I assume you're a fan, right?
Yeah, this movie's great. So good.
Yeah.
And it should be the first point. first movie people point to of his for a lot of his style because it's much more on the surface and easy to point out and look back on.
Yeah. I think I think this also really starts that running theme of like families, fathers, especially with families, and figuring out relationships with sons, figuring out relationships with parents. And Tenenbaum is just fantastic for so many reasons. You get so many great performances in it. Obviously, Gene Hackman in one of his like final like big
Yeah.
performances,
It's his second to last role before he retires.
and he's just absolutely fantastic in it. Kind of crazy that he almost turned it down, you know, because it's hard to imagine. Like I think Michael Caine was rumored to potentially also, you know, or be in the running or be like the second choice to Hackman. Um, but yeah, once they get Hackman, everybody else kind of falls into place. You mentioned Ben Stiller and Gwyneth Paltrow had really busy schedules and fit this in. And you have Danny Glover, Angelica Houston, Luke Wilson, Owen Wilson. Everybody's in this, and you know, I think this story also just has so much heart to it, which is obviously another piece of these Wes Anderson films. They all have like a beating heart below them, no matter if they're one of his best or one of his worst. And yeah, I love Tenenbaum, man. Going back to it, I went back to it just earlier this year, and was just like really blown away by it. Still, I mean, is there anything else really to say? I think the it's pretty obvious it's a great movie.
Yeah, well, I mean, just there's so much cool stuff, right? Like the visuals, like people being the Tenenbaum family for Halloween is a thing that's coming up on 20 years. You know, it has so much status, and the Hackman performance is so paramount, I would say, to the movie. He's incredible in it, and that's despite the fact that there are some parts that don't come across well. Like he's kind of racist to Danny Glover, his
Mhm.
character. You know,
Yep.
calls him Coltrane and to talk jive. Like it's not good. It's not good.
Mhm.
But I think overall the movie just incorporates so much Wes Anderson like qualities and like the nature of New York City in this too, and how it's like parts of it are
Yeah.
70s New York, parts of it are 90s New York, and you're never quite sure exactly where you are, but you still feel like you're in New York City. Really cool, like the stuff. I feel like every like major character has like really important scenes, and like the
Mhm.
Luke Wilson tennis meltdown
Yep.
as a cutaway comes to mind, and the Hey Jude needle drop when they're doing like the character introductions.
Mhm.
Just funny quotes like when Hackman meets Ben Stiller's kid, he's like, "Sorry about your mother. She was a terribly attractive woman." just there's just so much that you could take away. It's really
Yeah.
fun.
Yeah. Uh, Seeing all these people interact is so great. And then, you know, you also have some really like just like heartbreaking moments. You know, I think for me, I come back to like the ache of like Chas and Royal, you know, and Chas just wanting like to like resolve that relationship and kind of getting that like ending moment where he's like the one with his father, you know, when he passes, all the stuff between Margot and Richie, and you know Richie being completely heartbroken when the private eye like shares what he found, you know, the attempted suicide, and the whole like tenor of the movie shifting after that. It's just like really, really masterfully done. And I think the overall aspect of like Royal bringing his family together by letting go of control of things was really like just a really like profound point to the movie that um, this really is like I think when he really finds his stride, which is kind of funny because then just looking down at the next couple of movies that come, you know, we have Life Aquatic with Steve Zissou just a few years later, 2004. And while I think there's a lot of like Wes Anderson stylistic moments in this that really stand out, it just did not reach that same level as Tenenbaum for me.
No, no, obviously it didn't. Famously, not a box office success, not a critical success, especially in the wake of Tenenbaum. Big disappointment for Wes Anderson, and it has a lot of those trademarks still, like the visuals, the colors, the framing. There's a lot of like Wes Anderson stuff going on in Life
Mhm.
Aquatic, but it's almost too much of it, right? Like it's this really like indulgent movie that I still think is quite likable and fun,
Mhm.
but and I like it more than Bottle Rocket and Rushmore, but it's still, maybe it's just kind of like lacking some, propulsion, even though like the quest to find that shark doesn't quite, do it. Like I still
Yeah,
enjoy the movie, but it's something's got to be a lesser film in the filmography, and I think this is it for a lot of people. But I still enjoy it.
yeah, it's a bit meandering, the starting it off, I think, in a really smart way, where Steve Zissou is this like Jacques Cousteau type character, and um, he has this documentary and loses his partner, and is going to find this shark to like kind of prove to everybody that this actually happened, because I think a lot of people are questioning that and wanting to like exact revenge in some way. It starts off really intriguing, and then you get Owen Wilson coming in as Ned, also kind of his son, uh, Kingsley, renamed by Steve in the movie. You have Kate Blanchett, who's pregnant, and that's like a whole running through line. Angelica Houston and Jeffrey Goldblum going back and forth. There's like a lot of like stuff going on in this movie, and it's like a father and son film. It's like a uh like old man realizing like what has his life really meant, what's been important, kind of like last great hurrah. There's like a lot tied up into it, and it feels just a bit too big at points. And this is one of the longest run times of Wes Anderson film. I mean, it's close to 2 hours. Some of his other later movies will be around that time, maybe even a little longer as well. But it just feels long to me watching it, and um, yeah, I think he was just trying to do too much and didn't focus in on one thing too much here. But yeah, the picture you have behind you is one of the visuals that I take away most from the movie. Everybody like crowding around Steve Zissou as he's looking for this shark and exploring the deep. And I think the visuals underwater are really, really strong too. Like the glowing fish and stuff like that really stand out. Um, Anything else from this movie that you want to talk about, or you want to move on to another West movie?
Yeah, let's move on to Darjeeling Limited, 2007, and this is as far as a acclaimed filmmaker goes. The Dark Times, back to back films that are not financially successful is one thing, but not super popular amongst his fans nor the critics. 3 years later, 2007.
Yeah, and we want to talk about movies that feel long. This movie felt really long,
This
and it
movie
really
has
wasn't that
fucking
long.
5 endings, bro. Like it never ends. There's so many times it could have ended, it just doesn't. It keeps going.
Yeah, and Wilson, Owen Wilson brings a similar vibe that he did with Ding in Bottle Rocket, but Adrian Brody and Schwartzman are so toned down in this movie, and so like almost feeling like a bit listless at times and internal, that the movie feels really like heavy and just a slog at a lot of points, especially when it
Yeah.
passes to them.
And I think that's kind of the issue is this trio of brothers. I don't think the movie does a good enough job at making you invest in their spiritual journey, as it
Mhm.
were. Like you just don't care enough about them. And ultimately, I think the biggest takeaway with Darjeeling is it's just a great thing to point to for just Wes Anderson's cultural blind spots. Like to this point and
Mm.
in the future, co- characters of color are often just kind of on the side in his films, usually without many lines. Think of like Pagoda uh, in Royal T or Pele in Life Aquatic. It's like they're just
Mhm.
kind of Danny Glover, of course, as well. You know, they're just kind of to the side. It's a movie about white people and like white POV. But in this, it's from that, which is one thing, to a more offensive thing because you kind of have like that cultural tourism stuff going on. These three brothers going to India and when they go and see this, that they go save the two boys, but the one drowns. And it's like the death of the Indian boy is what finally gets them to have their epiphany and their awakening. And like even before that, the stuff on the train with Mara Karan's character, it's and like Schwartzman's
Rita.
just, yeah, it's just uh you know, I couldn't help but feel like it's just like, oh wow, these are like classic white
Tropes.
people in a foreign land stuff going on. It's
Yeah.
and like if the movie was better, you could probably get over it quite easily, but you can't because like that's like the whole thesis of the film is the entitled dudes that you don't even like that much.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And I think the point about kind of using this foreign land as like this like whimsical soul opening experience, and it just it felt a little gross at points. And um I really go back to like Adrian Brody, who I've had mixed feelings about. I'm excited to see what he brings for the next Wes Anderson film, but also
Mhm.
he's going to be in Succession this coming season. I think he could be really good with that, playing probably a slime ball of some sort. But he plays like a really wholesome person struggling with, impending fatherhood, fear of losing a relationship, and it's all like super toned down. And I feel like I want to see him do more of like Waited in Grand Budapest, right, where he's like this like I don't know, this almost like comical, cartoonish like villain kind of thing. Like, give me that Adrian Brody, not so much the internal one. Same with Schwartzman, whereas I feel like he doesn't really get that many moments to like really stand out and shine. He feels very like internal, and I don't know. This movie just did not work for me. And then when Angelica Houston shows up, I'm like, oh, kind of nice to see that, but I also feel like that feels problematic in some way. Her being like this leader of this cult, they need me type of thing, like that white savior
I mean, just at
feeling.
that point, you just want the movie to be done by now.
Yeah.
There's like a good 20 minutes left still.
Yep. Uh, and but again, I think some of the themes that you're seeing are like the family and dealing with trauma together, family exploring or trying to come together, heal the broken family over a
Mhm.
parental loss of some sort.
Yeah.
So I don't know, I don't want to talk too much about this one
Yeah.
because we have a much better movie up next. But
Yeah. There's one last note about it is he also made a Hotel Chevalier, which is a short film that acts as a prologue to the Darjeeling Limited. It's like 13 minutes long. It's about Schwartzman and Natalie Portman's character who has a brief cameo at the end of
mhm,
Darjeeling Limited. And that movie, yeah, that short, I think premiered at Venice when the film premiered, and then ended up getting released on the App Store, I believe. So that's out there. But yeah,
hmm,
uh, Wes, after some critical drubbings, some financial drubbings with Life Aquatic and Darjeeling Limited, 2 years later, '09, his first adaptation comes to pass, but
Roald
it's a
Dahl.
welcome return to form. Fantastic Mr. Fox, based off the Road Doll. Was it short story? Is it?
Yeah, I believe so. Yeah, he gets a nomination for this for best animated feature.
Yes.
um
Didn't win. Do you know who did win?
What, this is '09 animated feature. No, I can't think of it.
Pixar's Up wins, which is tough to argue against. It's a beloved
Hmm.
Pixar film. I Love Dogs also nominated for Best Animated Feature and did not win. Do you know what I Love Dogs lost to?
Probably Coco. Is that around that time?
Close. That's the year before.
Hmm. Year
Spider-Man
before.
Into the Spider-Verse,
Oh yeah, I mean
which
that
totally
should have
totally fine with
lost.
that as well.
Yeah, I mean I think this probably should have won over Up, but yeah, I can't argue Into the Spider Verse at all. I love Fantastic Mr. Foxman. Clooney's great, gives a great vocal performance. You obviously also then have Meryl Streep giving a great voice performance, and just it's a really fun film, and I think you can really just like lose yourself in the story of this, Fox who is like basically having to compromise on his dreams, compromise on the life he wants to have of being a chicken robber, and having to find a more normal job for the safety of his family, and just having that longing for it, and um, it, trying to prove himself to his family, trying to fix, right his wrongs. It's just really fun, seeing Bill Murray play the, what was he, a wombat who was a lawyer or something like that. I forgot exactly what animal he was, but like seeing like those sorts of like interactions, and uh man, really really enjoyed it. What did you like about this movie?
I think for me, it's the performance, and visually it's cool because it has all the West takes we've been talking about, but
Mhm.
there's a lot of like top down views and like zoomed out, like you're looking at the whole landscape, but because it's stop motion, it just is presented in a different way. I think that's the
Mhm.
stuff that I like the most is that it's really well done animation, and you don't get this kind of animation all that often because it's not as affordable to make as CG. So that and the Clooney of it all. This is a movie I came to late. Like I saw it after all the hype. I think I saw this on a plane actually for the first time,
Hmm.
and definitely a great plane movie, no question. And like
Yeah.
the little screen, you know, low def doesn't the stop motion isn't harmed by that. It's not like there's some grand scale you're missing.
Yeah, and it definitely is something that like holds your attention. I think it jumps from scene to scene, I guess like set piece to set piece kind of thing. Um, yeah, and just to correct myself, Bill Murray plays Clive Badger, so he's a badger. But yeah, there's a lot of really like fun vocal performances. One that stands out to me, Willem Dafoe as Rat, like that crazy rat. Really, really fun when he pops up and brings a really like brooding and like weird presence to the film. Um, Obviously, I think there's some really funny lines in this, like when they're talking to Petey and they're telling him he wrote a bad song, Petey. That's just a bad song. Like I just really like fun reading of that line. I don't know, man. Just I think this is definitely one of my favorites. And we're gonna talk about Isle of Dogs, but putting these two together, I think he doesn't quite capture what he does in this film in Isle of Dogs, which I think makes it even more impressive that this is just to make an animated feature when that's not really what he's done. So something I think we only know people as of like Tim Burton status to be
Mm,
doing, making these
yeah,
live action films and these animated films on the same level.
yeah, it's good. It's good, but I might actually rank Isle of Dogs higher. TBD.
Hmm. We'll talk about that in a second then. Um, so then 3 years later, we get Moonrise Kingdom, which Fantastic Mr. Fox was certainly a return to form, or a continue or a return to form for him in a sense. But Moonrise Kingdom is seeing him get back to obviously live action actors and movies, and I think recapturing what he found in Tenenbaum in this movie. I mean,
Hmm.
Moonrise Kingdom, it's the top of a lot of people's lists for Wes Anderson. Do you think it deserves to be up there?
Yes, I'm very high on Moonrise Kingdom. I like it a lot. Has a lot of the classic West themes, but interestingly, it's his first one to be focused on actual kids, right? Preteens, not younger than Max Fisher. Ben
Yep.
Stiller's kids and Royal Tenenbaums are supporting characters at best. This is centered on kids, and it's about like their journey, and it's really cool to see that. I think uh, pulled off by by Wes, but still feeling like one of his movies. Also, I just love everything with the scouting in it. As a scout, Boy Scout, as someone who worked at Boy Scout camp for many many years, to see the khaki scouts led by Ed Norton and doing a lot of like
Yep.
classic like scouting cliches and stuff in the movie, but I just love all that stuff, and like there's so many fun moments. Like you get young Lucas Hedges in like his first acting role as like one of
Mhm.
the Boy Scouts who's trying to like bring them home, and like they have that standoff fight in the woods. There's so much fun
Yep.
stuff. I like it for the kids, and I think if anything, like I connect less with a lot of the adult characters in this than the kids, and the adult characters are obviously familiar people we know, such as Bill Murray and Ed Norton and stuff, but uh, I just really like the journey. I guess maybe like I don't love the ending. I love everything up to the ending, but
Mhm.
still like it quite a bit.
Yeah, I think the adventure and that feeling of like having a childhood adventure that feels surreal and feels uh you know I, I guess in ways almost kind of like a Greek like story, right? Where you have all these different like people that they're running from, people that are chasing them. You mentioned the fight with like Lucas Hedges, things like that. There's like this brooding sense, but at the center, this like love story and this like very, it has like a very specific feel that I think you can relate to, and it feels nostalgic to a lot of people. So I really appreciate that. Um, yeah, I agree. I think like some of the uh, parental and adult figures in this are hard to connect with. I mean, someone like Ed Norton feels totally unrelatable to me, but I think you can start to kind of like as you as I get older, at least I can start to feel a little bit of like what the parents feel in this somewhat. Um, it's funny because I'm looking at the cover photo that you have behind you, and I kind of forget that Bruce Willis is in this at points.
Yes,
Which
same.
it's just funny because like he's such a big movie star, but it just kind of falls to the side with this. Um, it's also interesting because when I think about this movie, I think about summer, and I think that has a lot to do with his choice to like kind of wash everything in like sepia and yellows in this. Like even the background is green, but like with like a yellow tint to it, and it really feels like you're like out on a hot summer day. I wasn't a scout, but I imagine you probably had a lot of those days where you're just like out kayaking or canoeing or camping and just felt like it was just like sun constantly, right?
That's why you're there, man. Be out in the shit doing things. Yeah. Yeah. Oh man. Yeah. Ed Norton's my favorite of the adult characters, though, just because he's the scout leader. So
Yeah,
yeah, I like Moonrise Kingdom. Another movie I came to late, like it's a movie like I heard about for a few years before I actually saw it.
yeah, same here. But you mentioned that the Grand Budapest Hotel was the first Wes Anderson film that you saw in the theater, and I think this was nominated for what, 9 Academy Awards.
Yes, nine noms, including director and picture, and it won four down the line Academy
Crazy.
Awards. And it was my first Wes Anderson movie in the theater. It probably was a lot of people's first because it's his most financially successful. Like I said, 172 million worldwide, and was that's the first Best Director nomination at the Oscars. He of course did win the Indie Spirit for directing back for Rushmore, but this was like the coronation of sorts for Wes, even if it didn't win any of the top prizes.
Yeah, I didn't see this in theaters. I think I saw it shortly after the Oscars that year because I saw it in one stuff. It was nominated a lot, and I wanted to catch up on it. This film's just really delightful. You know, you get Ray Fiennes in one of the juiciest roles of his career.
Yes.
I'd probably say. Being Gustav is like the kind of part most actors just dream of having. um, and you kind of have him running around with Tony Revolori,
Hmm.
who as Zero is just like plays such a believable kid, but you see like his confidence growing and growing throughout the film, and it's like really fun to see him like develop. And yeah, it just feels like every character in this movie is like growing 100 on the black, just really operating on
Yeah.
all levels. Really fun to see.
Yeah. Funny thing about Tony Revolori too is now you get to see him as a like 20 something in the Tom Holland Spider-Man movies, and he's just so
Mhm.
different than what he was in
Yep.
this because he's
He's
much
a
more of
dick
a
in those
he's a
movies.
dick by design as
Yep.
whatever his name is, the antagonist of Peter Parker. Yeah,
Mhm.
I think what's so fun about Grand Budapest Hotel is it has again all the things you expect from him with the visual stylings and like the thematic ideas, but it's on a bigger scale, the biggest scale he's had this far. Even when early on, when you're in the hotel, it just feels like such a daunting, impressive setting. But then once this plot picks up and we have left the hotel for so much time, we're just kind of like bobbing around in these mountains and stuff on cable cars, in a prison, sneaking away in a car. Like it, it's probably his most propulsive movie, and that's why I like it so much.
Yeah, propulsive is a good word because it does feel like you're never in one place for too long once you leave the hotel at the beginning. Like they have the setup and then it's you're in a train, you're at the reading of the will, you're running across wherever, they're being chased, they're trying to get away. And I think a lot of these West films have that like caper feel to them, but this like at times almost feels a bit like Hitchcock in some sense, like that scene where Willem Dafoe's character Jopling is chasing Jeffrey Goldblum's Deputy Vilmos Kovacs character around. It's like like through the museum, and he finally kills him where he like shuts the door and his fingers come flying off. Like that scene feels like North by Northwest at points, like some of the shots in it. And it's really just like him trying stuff and it really working really well, and seeing the way that all the parts kind of move together and operate. There is like a mystery sense to parts of it that really comes together really really well at the end. And I think it has a really sweet ending too, where um uh what's the name, Murray Abraham playing
Mhm.
the adult Zero, um talking about why he keeps the hotel, and he did it because um Agatha and him were happy there for a short period of time, and like what you take away from that probably means something different to everybody. But just I think it's a really sweet ending, and yeah, I just really really enjoy this movie, and everybody, all like the big name actors in it. I mean, you get down to like the second or third line, it's like Harvey Keitel has like a what like 5 minute cameo maybe in this. Like it's
Really
just really
recognizable.
fun to see them all pop up. It's great.
Yeah, also interesting. Grand Budapest Hotel was Wes's second movie with Fox Searchlight after Darjeeling, and since then he's stayed with Searchlight. Now just Searchlight Pictures, Budapest, Isle of Dogs, and The French Dispatch. And if you actually look at his filmography, even though he's been with Scott Rudin, the producer, now disgraced, for a long time, the way like Tarantino was with Harvey Weinstein for a lot, Wes has actually jumped around a lot with his distribution. Bottle Rocket was a Sony movie, then
Mm.
Rushmore, Royalty, and Life Aquatic were Buena Vista, part of Disney. Darjeeling's Fox Searchlight, Fantastic Mr. Fox is 20th Century Fox, and everything else is Searchlight. So it's kind of weird to see him actually jump around that, even though like now he's not making indie film anymore, and he probably has his home there. I think it's a good home to be at Searchlight in terms of these kind of movies. Um, so also, seeing all the Oscar success he got with Budapest Hotel, the reputation of Searchlight doesn't need to be sold, I guess. So it makes sense that he's sticking around, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. And just thinking about this movie too, I think one last thought I had is I think in terms of like the costume and setting style, this is maybe my favorite Anderson film in that sense. I mean, Tenenbaum is iconic because those outfits are very easy to replicate, and people do, like you mentioned, the Halloween costume of it all. But like the purple suits on Ray Fiennes and Zero, or Adrian Brody and Willem Dafoe dressed all in black, really like those like evil villain characters, just really really stands out. And then you think about like the Nazi uniforms as well, aren't like they don't feel like the traditional ones in a way. They're like kind of like bright gray in a sense. And then as at the end of the film they turn black, and I find these black uniforms so drab, just like really really fun. And then like you see the Grand Budapest Hotel behind Dave, and like the pink of it all, and like the colors inside the hotel really pop. It's just like really really fun. Yeah, and then we talked about Isle of Dogs. We've reviewed it for Nostalgia. Go check out that review. And I think what we talked about with that review, if I'm recalling correctly, was that we really liked it. Felt like it wasn't maybe a top two, like three or four Anderson movie, but I think we really felt like it still had enough to make it a really really solid movie. And we're kind of grading on a curve at this point, because when we're saying like it's a good Wes Anderson movie, it's better than most movies that you watch in
Mhm.
a given year, and this is kind of in that category for me.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. Um, I think the biggest thing with Isle of Dogs, it's just that conversation about again like Wes Anderson's blind spots, and in this case, like I don't think Isle of Dogs is offensive as Darjeeling, but
Mhm.
it's a different kind of thing, and it's a conversation that was had in 2018 that we wouldn't have been having if it was 2008, where it's like clearly intended as a homage to Japanese culture and Japanese filmmaking, but there's just key choices in Isle of Dogs that distract from that, namely that the dogs speak English,
Mhm.
or that the voice acting is English translated for us, whereas the Japanese characters don't get subtitles. So like the Japanese people are almost side pieces in their own story, and just the whole premise of whether this need to be in Japan at all kind of comes up. Again, a bit
Mhm.
of a cultural tourism on Wes's point, best part. But I guess your mileage will vary on whether you can let that go, because it does seem well intended.
Mhm.
And I still think the movie is a lot of fun. I like this more than Fantastic Mr. Fox. It doesn't have like the central performance like George Clooney does as the Mr. Fox, but
Yeah.
uh, I think maybe like visually, I think Isle of Dogs stands out more as it was Megasaki City, whatever it's called. Like a lot of just really fun stuff going on in this one.
Yeah. Uh, Bryan Cranston still is really good as Chief, but I agree. I don't think you have the same magnetism that Clooney brought to Mr. Fox. Um, I when I think about this film, this is so funny to me. The scene that always sticks in my mind is watching them make the sushi, and just like the framing of that shot, how beautiful it was, the deliberateness with how Wes like showed every step of it, didn't like yada yada any parts of it. And
Mm,
while that's like a very inconsequential part of the movie, I think it just is like a perfect encapsulation of what Wes does well, and the ability to like make mundane things seem pretty interesting, or something that you at least want to watch. Um, and yeah, it just feels like a nice rollicking adventure, and obviously couched with dogs, which people love dogs. I obviously love dogs. Makes it a really fun film, and I think there's a lot of heart to it as well. And I think that it also gets a little bit more political than a lot of Wes's movies
mm,
usually get. Talking about like themes of uh, immigration, acceptance of other people, trying to understand other people, other creatures. It's just I think that he takes some bigger swings with that, and I'm wondering if we see something like that continue in French Dispatch, which has been is being taken place in like post World War II France. And I assume there's going to be a lot of subtext from that within the film. So definitely interesting to see Wes move in that direction. Um, yeah, I guess as we wrap it up and we're now through those nine, any just like overall thoughts before we get to our rankings, Dave?
um, hmm. It's cool to see with French Dispatch coming up that he's getting Saoirse again, but also getting Timothy Chalamet in a piece
Huge.
of the ensemble. He always finds a way to bring new people in. His Untitled movie that he's making right now, newcomers include Tom Hanks and Margot Robbie and Rupert Friend. Like it is always cool to see that
Yeah.
brings new people in and keeps the OGs going.
Yeah.
And
Rotating through.
yeah, and even if like as I've said, like there are some blind spots in like how Wes treats his characters, and he definitely has movies that are uh I guess hard to like get behind in full, such as like Darjeeling. He still is such an intentional filmmaker that I'm happy to watch any of his misses just because yeah, he's trying it. Like I said, like he's one of the last like auteurs that manages to have the requisite clout to continue to make things he wants to make. So can't be too
Yeah.
critical, I guess.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think going through the movies in chronological order, the thing that just stands out is after Mr. Fox, it seems like he's really tapped into something for himself, where even like the worst movie post Mr. Fox is probably Isle of Dogs, but we still look at that as a really good movie. So he's on a nice run right now. He has, and uh, I fully expect French Dispatch, which supposedly got a 9-minute standing ovation after it premiered at, was it Cannes? I think it premiered at.
Yes.
So expectations are quite high, and I expect this run to continue. So just cool to see him continually operating at this high level. But why don't we get to the rankings now, Dave? You know, I think there's a clear bottom couple movies here.
Hmm.
Um, for me, number 9 is Darjeeling. Is that your number 9 as well?
Uh, my number 9 is Bottle Rocket. Actually, my number 8 is Darjeeling. Close. I
Yeah.
don't love either one. I think I give Darjeeling the slight edge just because of the scale of it. But
Mhm.
the Owen Wilson performance in Bottle Rocket's probably the best out of anything between those two movies. And Bottle Rocket is less offensive, so maybe I should switch
Yeah, I have
that.
Bottle Rocket as my number 8, mostly because I think Owen Wilson's performance is great, but also seeing him or seeing that like final scene where they're doing the heist and it starts to go wrong. I just found that to be a really enjoyable scene overall, and probably a scene I enjoyed more than anything in Darjeeling. Um, so yeah, we have 9 and 8 pretty much the same. 7 for me is Life Aquatic with Steve Zissou. Um,
Same.
yeah, and for all the reasons we talked about, I think it, it's a bit meandering and just kind of like the most Wes Anderson-y movie we could he could have possibly made. Um, 6, what do you got?
6 for me is Rushmore, which to many people I'm sure is way too low, but just never fully connected with the Max Fisher character. There's still things I like about the film. Um, and I understand the cult qualities of it too. Like I feel like the bones of a movie I would love are there, but it doesn't quite come together for me personally.
Yeah, if you're watching on YouTube, Dave has tiers. He has a D, C, B, A, and an S tier. Darjeeling and Bottle Rocket are in my D tier, and Life Aquatic is in my C tier. But then I put Rushmore as the bottom, so I also have it 6, but it's at the bottom of my B tier. I see it as a
Yeah,
really
that's fair.
um, yeah, see, it's a really solid movie, and you can see a lot of the bones of the better movies to come. And that cult status, I think, is fully deserved. So, my number 6, your number 6, and I think we both have the same 5 with Isle of Dogs as well.
So I actually have Fantastic Mr. Fox 5, Isle of Dogs 4 just ahead. Just like Isle of Dogs
Ah,
a little bit more. Again, despite the issues with it, which I know is probably controversial, Fantastic Mr. Fox is beloved.
yeah. Well, I think it's a solid choice, and you can't really go wrong with either. So yeah, I had Isle of Dogs 5, and Moonrise Kingdom 4 for me. I think
Nice.
we just in hearing our conversation, it definitely is a really good movie, but just didn't and I didn't connect with it the same way I think a lot of people did. And then I had Isle of Dogs uh, as my 5 and my 4 was Moonrise Kingdom. Sorry. Then so
Mhm.
what did you have as your number 3? Are we up to? I'm
Yeah,
losing track
Moonrise
a little
Kingdom
bit.
is my number 3.
Okay,
Yeah, still
Moonrise
really
Kingdom
like that
3.
one. And I do give the edge to live action over animation when all things are equal. Not that all things are equal in this case, but yeah, I like Moonrise Kingdom. I think it's probably going to develop like a cult status one day. I have to imagine it's kind of hard for his movies now to develop cult status. Wes Anderson's
Mhm.
so popular, so mainstream in like the filmmaking community and stuff. But I wouldn't be surprised if younger kids in Gen Z that were way too young to have any idea what Moonrise Kingdom was 9 years ago. I wouldn't be surprised to see this movie get like a reevaluation and greater appreciation generations to come.
Yeah, I could definitely see that happen as well. I did have Fantastic Mr. Fox right above it. I think that could flip for me at any point, and the same with my 1 and 2. I feel like it could flip at any point. But yeah, Fantastic Mr. Fox I talked about, just find it to be super enjoyable, fast paced, captivating, and I think some of the best performances, given that they are just voice performances, but out of any of the films. So that's my number 3, and then my S. So that would be my A tier, and then my S tier, similar to you, Dave, is Tenenbaum and Budapest. But I have them flipped. I have Tenenbaum as my number one and Grand Budapest as my number
Mhm.
two. Although I might have talked myself into flipping those just in this
Yeah.
conversation. Those can really flip, I think, depending on my feeling for the day.
Yeah, they definitely could. I Budapest 1, Tenenbaum 2, but yeah, definitely could see it flip because both have so much to like, so much to recommend, so much uh, to enjoy revisiting. I think they're clearly the pinnacle of what Wes has done, and cool to see them so spread out 13 years apart in his career. And obviously, high hopes for French Dispatch. I don't need it to be in his
Up
top
there.
tier because his top tier is so hard to crack. You know,
Yeah.
so uh, if it's remotely good at all, I'll be very pleased.
Yeah, I get the sense French Dispatch is going to be at least in like our B tiers, if not higher. But yeah, I don't need it to be that good to enjoy the movie, which is a really nice place to be as an auteur. So yeah, our Wes Anderson rankings. Let us know yours in the comments below. Let us know any thoughts you have about the movies as we kind of broke them down. Let us know if you're excited for French Dispatch. Where do you think it will fall on your list in the future? Follow us at Nowstalgia Pod. Dave, any last thoughts as we wrap up for today?
Might have to do another movie director ranking soon. Tarantino already out there. YouTube.com/nostalgia pod. Wes Anderson in the can now. I don't know. Denny
ETA?
Villeneuve is releasing a movie the same day as Wes Anderson.
Ooh,
Another relevant director with about 10 movies out. I think that's the rankings in our future.
I would love to do a Denny Villeneuve ranking. So stay tuned for that. We'll catch you soon.